Today we're going to be learning Shekalim Daf Yud Chet. Today's daf is dedicated for Yom HaShoah in memory of all those who died in the Holocaust, and by Dai Gittel Kusher in honor of her father's second yahrzeit, Moshe ben Avraham Neuhauser, a Holocaust survivor. Dad often spoke about life before and during the Shoah. At times I suffered from survivor's guilt as a child of survivors, but then I turned it around from Dad's example. One survives to fulfill a mission to learn, teach, and live Yiddishkeit. He would be so proud of all of us on our daily journey, as he too loved his daily learning. And by Ellen Werlin in honor of her sister Rachel Gabal on the occasion of her birthday, with thanks to her for introducing myself and her niece Abigail to the daf, as well as for other blessings of having her as a sister and an aunt. We're going to start our daf today, Shekalim Daf Yud Chet, at the bottom of the previous page. At the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Bet, we were talking about these 10 tables, and I mentioned yesterday that I thought there were 10 menorahs. It comes up in today's daf, so here we're going to get to the 10 menorahs also. I did some research I looked in Sefer Melachim. I noticed that the verses they were quoting about the 10 tables were all from Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim, and not from Melachim. So I looked at Melachim, and I noticed that in Sefer Melachim, it's actually interesting. It mentions the 10 menorahs, but it doesn't mention the 10 tables. It says Shulchan in singular, the table was one, and it says there were 10 menorahs, which is interesting. In Divrei Yamim, it mentions the 10 menorahs and the 10 and the plural anyway of the tables. So we're going to see now, right? I think it says, does it say specifically 10 there? Vayash Shulchanot Asara. Yeah, it says 10 tables there also. So in Divrei Yamim, it talks about 10 tables and 10 menorahs. And in Melachim, it only meant, and by the way, they never quote that pasuk in Melachim for some reason in the Gemara about the 10 menorot. They only quote the ones from Chronicles. Tani. So the Braita starts off and says, oh, and just to remind everyone to register for the Siyum. Okay, the Siyum is Sunday night at 8:30 Israel time, which the same time we usually have it wherever you are. So registration's open on the site. You can get to it through our Facebook page. There's an event on Facebook. So please go and register. We have a good program. We're having a Siyum Shas from Shari Mendez, which is great. I want to also, by the way, invite anyone who's finishing Shas. Many people finish Shas at all different points. If you're finishing Shas and you want to do it in the context of our Siyum, please contact us and let us know. And we're happy to include you in the ceremony, down the road. So for anyone who's nearing it or will remember when they get to it, so please let us know. Okay, Mizrach u'Ma'arav hayu netunim. So we saw these two opinions. We said, remember, here's our picture of the Mikdash. Okay, so you go into the Heichal, and on the north side, you're going to have the Shulchan. The table has to be on the north. Now, the question is, were these 10 tables going in a row from east-west, or were they going north-south? It sounds like they're going north-south because it says Miyaminu Smol. You assume that means when you walk in, so on your right and on your left, you're going to see all of them. So therefore they say, well, Mizrach u'Ma'arav hayu netunim divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says they must have been, no, not 5 this way, 5 that way to the person standing there walking in. It must be right to the right and to the left of the Shulchan. And then everything's on the right side, right, which is the north side. So I think I might have said south for the north. Okay, I don't remember what I said, but it has to be on the north side. So now they say, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Tzafon v'Darom hayu netunim. No, he says, no, they were Tzafon Daroma. They went north-south, okay? Now, Gemara says, Man damar Mizrach u'Ma'arav nicha, kulun ru'yim l'sherut. If you say Mizrach Ma'arav, it makes sense. Then all of them can be used properly because they have to be on the north side in order to be used. And then we talked about this yesterday. Were they actually used or were they decorative only? Now, the assumption of this question, so this question is going to say, Manda amar tzafon darom, nimtza shulchan b'darom. Doesn't make any sense if you say tzafon darom, because then the shulchan is going to be on the south side. Some of the tables will be on the south side of the room, and that can't be. Now, you could answer, now the Gemara is not going to answer this question, and that's the end. The next 3 words, it sounds like it's a continuation, but we're going to delete those words because most of the versions take it out. It doesn't really make sense, the other words, and there's really no answer to this question. Now, you might say, why didn't they just answer? The one who says north-south says they were there for decorative purposes only. Even if you say they're there for decorative purposes, still you would think that if you're going to add these 10 tables, they must need to be added where the table goes, which is specifically on the south side. So I'm sorry, on the north side. So therefore, it doesn't really make sense that they would be on the wrong side, and therefore they leave it as a question. But that, in fact, that opinion does hold as an opinion, even though it's difficult. I just want to think about how Shlomo could build these 10 tables when there's only supposed to be one table, right? Some people say, isn't it Baal Tosif? You're not allowed to add to what it says in the Torah. The Torah said one table. Where do you get this idea of 10? To which some people answer, he must have had some tradition. And that when Moshe was told one table, he was told, well, when Shlomo builds the temple, he'll build 10. Now, we don't really have proof for this, obviously, but there has to be some explanation. And that's, kind of the best explanation they came up with. So how could he just start adding these things in? And in fact, it's even more strange if you think that it went north-south, because generally we understand, right? Again, if you look at this map, it's hard to see exactly, but the Shulchan is in the north, the menorah is in the south, and each one, like it says, nochach pnei, this is supposed to face the other one. You start imagining 10 tables going across the whole room, it kind of blocks the whole image. Like we have this image, and we're going to talk about it very soon. There was this triangle in there. Okay, so if you see the picture, the one that you could see the most obvious is the Mizbach HaZahav. That's over here. They form a kind of triangle. Okay, the Shulchan and the menorah are opposite each other. We saw those verses a few days ago. They're opposite. And the Mizbach HaKtoret, or Mizbach HaZahav as it's called, the incense altar, the golden one, was further toward the door, the entranceway of the sanctuary. So it made this sort of triangle. Try to imagine that with all sorts of tables in between going across. It seems weird. It makes a lot more sense to say that look at the table, right? When you're looking at the side, there were all these tables to the side of it. And the menorah side had menorahs going. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. I mean, even so, it still sounds like the room's going to be kind of busy and full, but at least it makes sense. So again, some people think these were used. How were they used? So it seems like one week they would use one table and put the lechem apanim on there. Another week they'd use another table. Another week, they would just choose which tables they used. I also want to point out another thing. I can't remember if I mentioned this yesterday, but I don't always remember to say everything that I mean to say. We talked about the pasuk that said shulchanot. There was a verse that said the tables in plural. So some people say that they would put the lechem apanim on. So how could you possibly say they didn't use the tables? So some people explain that that's the two. Remember we saw in the 13 tables, there are these two tables on the entranceway in the hallway, the ulam that leads to the sanctuary. There's one of marble and one of gold, or maybe silver and gold. There was a whole debate, and you would put the bread on there on its way in and on its way out. So you could claim that the shulchanot in plural refers to those two tables and not these other 10 tables. So that's another way of explaining it. That answer, by the way, because we're going to have a parallel sugya by the menorot, that's not going to be able to hold true there, because there is no such menorah that they used temporarily while they were lighting the other one. So it's a good answer for the tables, but it's not a good answer for the menorot, the candelabra. Vahatane, so skip the word vaha. Now we're starting from the fourth word on the daf. Tane. It says in the Braita, Shulchan Yanatum mechatzi habayit ulifnim. Now we're going to get to where in the room they were situated. So to get to that, first you have to understand the measurements. So again, you can look at these maps. Okay, again, anyone who wants, I can send you a link to where to buy these. And I'm not a sales agent for the Mechona Mikdash, but on the Mechona Mikdash website, they sell these and they're excellent. And I highly recommend using them. You can order them in America also. Or probably, I don't know if anywhere abroad. I know people in America did order them. I'm hoping that in other places around the world, you can order them. I assume you can. So now you start with going into the Hechal. This whole space you see is rectangular from the Hechal, the sanctuary, which is this part is called the Kodesh, and the inner part is called the Kodesh Kodeshim. The whole length of this space is 60 cubits. The Kodesh Kodeshim takes up 20. It's 20 by 20. Everything is 60 by 20. The Kodesh Kodeshim is 20 by 20, a square. The Hechal itself, where you have the Mizbeach, Shulchan, and Menorah, that is 40 by 20, so 40 length. So now the question is, where within this room in the length and where within the width were these kelim situated? So the Shulchan was mechatzi habayit ulifnim. It was in the inner part. It doesn't say exactly how far into the room, but it was in the inner half, meaning if you take this 40 length, it was in the inner 20, okay? Mashuch min hakotel shtei amot b'mechzeh klapei tzafon. If you go from the northern side, because we said it was on the northern side, and you move away, now we're talking within the width of the room, move 2.5 cubits into the room, which means if the whole room is 20 cubits, you're very much closer to the northern side. and that's where you would put it. Umenorah kinegdo, wherever it was situated in the length of the room, the menorah is opposite it on the southern side. And again, the menorah is going to be also 2.5 away from the wall on the southern side. Mizbach hazahav hayanatum be'emtza habayit. Now, in terms of the width of the room, so these two were close to the sides of the room. The Mizbach hazahav, the golden altar, which was used for the incense, was exactly situated in the center of the width of the room. So exactly in the middle. That's how you get this triangle shape. Okay, because that's in the middle. And not only that, in the middle wouldn't help. It could be, it's maybe in the middle of both those two. But now they're going to tell us, Mashuch kim'a klape chutz. It's pulled a little bit toward the entrance of the Hechal, meaning outside, toward the entrance, rather than going further in toward the Kodesh Kodashim. That's why in our map, you can see it's situated, okay, more toward the entrance area, but we're going to see exactly how much more. And then past there, when you get closer to the Kodesh Kodashim, you get to the Shulchan and the menorah. It doesn't give us exact measurements as to how far in they're supposed to be, but that's why you end up with this triangle shape between the three. Now, as opposed to in the width, the Mizbach HaZahav was exactly in the center. Now we're going to say when it comes to the length of the room, you're going to have to put it in the second third of the room, when it's past the first third, which means that if we look at that room, including the whole space, including the Kodesh Kodashim, there's 60 cubits. So you're going to put it past the first 20 cubits. So as opposed to saying we're going to put it in the center of the 40 cubits, because remember, this Mizbeach takes up space itself, so it would be mamash in the center. No, you can even see by the map, it's like right past the center line, right? You draw a line in the middle at 20, and it's in from there. In other words, in toward the Kodesh Kodashim, but right at that line, basically. So it's right past the first third of the room. So that's where it is. Eser menorot asa Shlomo. Now we're going to have an exact same sugya, a replica of the previous sugya. We're talking about replicode as it is, of replicode of the menorah. So now we're going to say there were Eser menorot asa Shlomo. He did 10 other menorot besides the main one. Shene'emar vayasek menorot hazahav eser kimishpatam. It says it there explicitly in Divrei Yamim, and as I said, it also says it in Melachim that he made 10 menorot. V'yitem behechal chamesh miyamin v'chamesh mismol, and again it says the same thing, to the right and to the left. Right, 5 to the right, 5 to the left. In Tamar, so same exact question. If you're going to say chamesh b'tzafon v'chamesh b'darom, 5 in the south and 5 in the north, halo ena menorah kshera ela b'darom. The menorah can only be in the south. Shenemar zot menorah nochach hashulchan al yerech hamishkan temana. Temana is south. So how could that be? Ma tamad lomar chamesh miyamin and chamesh mismol. So how do you understand chamesh miyamin and chamesh mismol? Ela chamesh miyamin menorato shel Moshe v'chamesh mismola. Again, when you're looking at the menorah, 5 are on the right and 5 are on the left, which means it goes east-west and not north-south. Even though they were all there, they only used the menorah of Moshe. Okay, this is a verse from Divrei Yamim, I believe, right? It says... Right, right, Menorat HaZahav, it's from Chronicles. Even there it says specifically Menorat HaZahav singular, right? And its nerot would be lit every evening. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Al Kulan Hayam Avir. No, they were all used. Shene'emar ve'et hamenorot ve'nerotea leva'aram kamishpat lifnei hadvir zahav sagul. Another pasuk from Divrei Yamim, it says, and the menorot and their candles. Okay, and here it says it in plural. All the menorot, right, were lit or were made of zahav, right? So sorry, it says the menorot and their candles. That must meant that they had candles, okay, which means that they were also lit. Okay, leva'aram kamishpat, to light them according to the laws. So it sounds like they did light all of them. So again, we have this debate, and like I said, there it's hard to say that there's some other way to understand that verse. Now we want to understand this zahav sagul, close gold, which is going to mean very pure blood, very pure gold. So now we're going to see okay, this verse is when describing in Chronicles the menorah. It talks about the prachim, the flowers on it, and the candles and the milkachayim. Everything about it was michlot zahav. What does michlot come from? What's the root of that word? Hein kilu zahavo, and now there's some problems with versions of the text here. I'm going to go with a different version than what it says. Hein kilu zahavo shel Shlomo. They took, remember, Vayikichlot Moshe, when Moshe finished to build the Mishkan, Kala is to finish. So Michlot Zahav means they used all the gold of Shlomo for this. Now, this is a little bit strange. Shlomo had so much gold. He was so wealthy. Very hard to imagine. So they're going to explain now. Tani Rav Yehuda b'Shem Asi. Shaya Shlomo notel 1,000 kikrei zahav. He would take 1,000 kikarot of gold. Umachnisam likor. He would put them in the furnace. Umotzian ad shehu ma'amidan al echat. He would purify it in the furnace until it went from 1,000 to 1. Okay, it would take out all the bad until he would refine it so much that he would basically lose. That's what it means, michlot. He would lose gold. It's not like it took all of his gold, but it took a lot of his gold, because to get it down to that fine gold, you need to put it in for a very long, to basically get it really down. Okay, as it says in the pasuk, he made it it was kikar zahav tahor. So there was from 1,000, it went down to 1. Tanya. Now we're going to have a bright about this. And here I'm going to change the version also to a different version because it makes a lot more sense. Amar Rabbi Yossi be Rabbi Yehuda, right? Obviously, I'm not making up the words. These appear in the commentaries as an alternate version. Maaseh b'menorat mikdash. They say it was true about the menorah and the mikdash. Shehaita yetera al Moshe menorah she'asa Moshe b'midbar dinar zahav. It was 1 golden dinar larger than the one that Moshe made. So as when they built the menorah, it came out a little bit heavier than the menorah that Moshe did. So what they do, so they put it in the furnace for 80 times and nothing happened to it. So this seems strange. Didn't we just say we got from 1,000 to 1? So how could this be just a little bit larger? And we tried to get it down and nothing happened to it. But no, it actually makes sense. Why? Until you refine it, it still needs refining. So you can get from 1,000 to 1. But once you get to that 1, right? Min du kayam al barare, when it's already totally refined, lo chaser klum, then you're not going to be able to get any change to happen. So that's how we explain that, how that story works in with what we said. New halacha. Halacha daled. 13 shofarot hayu b'mikdash. Now we're going to get to the first ones we started with, the 13 shofarot, which are kind of like stucco boxes that were in the temple. V'katuv alehen taklin chadatin. That's where the commentary taklin chadatin gets his name, right? Shekalim chadashim. Okay, that was for the new shekalim. I'm going to read them first, and then the Mishnah is going to explain. So I won't explain yet. Taklin atikin, the old shekalim. Kinim. Those are pairs of birds, although we'll see exactly what they mean here. Gozle ola, also birds for an ola. We're going to have to see what those two mean. There's going to be 2 different interpretations about what they are, it's a very basic difference between the 2 interpretations. Eitzim, wood, because they needed wood for the fire on the altar. So people would donate money for wood. Livona, frankincense, which we need, right? You can offer a donation of frankincense on the altar. That's a donation. That's something people would offer on the altar. Zahav la kaporet. Okay, this is, or lichporet. There's 2 different ways to read it. Either it's zahav for the kaporet, which is the cover of the Kodesh Kodeshim. There was gold in it. Or it's chforet. Now it's mentioned in a number of places, chforei zahav. Chforei zahav are basins that were made of gold. These are the klei sharet. There were a lot of basins in the temple. So if you would give a donation, a basic donation to utensils in the mikdash, the default one would be the kforei zahav, the basins of gold, and it's much more likely that that's what they're referring to than something so specific as the zahav for the kaporet. The kforei zahav to me makes a lot more sense because it's something that's much more usable that a lot of people would have donated money to. Shisha nidava, and 6 or 4 nidava. These are the nidavot that we keep talking about throughout the Masechet. If you have extra money left over from your chatat, so you put it in the nidava. If you have extra, right, any extra money goes to olot nidava. Remember, burnt offerings that are volunteer offerings. These are what we call kates hamizbeach, so that the altar never lies without anything going on it. So they would sacrifice them anytime there was no action in the temple. We're going to have to explain, which we'll get to at the end of the daf, 4 explanations as to why there were 6. Right? Seems a little imbalanced. You would think maybe just 1 or something, or 2. I don't know why are there 6. We'll have to see. Taklin chadatin. So let's go through them. Shekalim chadashim. Shebechol shana v'shana, that means this year's shkalim. That's pretty obvious. Va'atikin, so again, this is stucco boxes. People, you gave your new shekel, you would put it in there. Okay, these are for the people who went directly to the temple and put it in themselves, as opposed to, remember, there were people collecting the money for other people. Atikin, mishalo hevi eshtikad, shokel shana haba'ah. Okay, something's a little weird sounding about this. Whoever didn't give last year gives for the upcoming year. Now, what does that mean? So some people say what this means is, if you didn't give last year, so everyone agrees, if you didn't give last year, you have to give both for this year and for last year. So you'll give a whole shekel. And what do you do with that? So according to some interpretations, it sounds like the simple reading here, your new shekel even goes into last year's. Unclear why that would be exactly, because you would think you would split your half a shekel would go into this year's and half a shekel would go into last year's. But, and some people actually do understand it that way, but it does sound from the pshat that all of it goes into last year's box. Kinim. Okay, now we're going to have a debate here. Kinim mean pairs of birds. Now, when you can give a bird to the as a sacrifice, let's say you volunteer, I'm going to bring a bird offering. You have two options of what you can bring. You can't just bring any bird. It's either, and if you're familiar with the Torah, it comes up all the time, either 2 torim or 2 b'nei yonah. Torim are turtle doves, and b'nei yonah are pigeons, young pigeons. The turtle doves are actually older. Remember, we got to all the ages of all the animals. The turtle doves are older turtle doves, and the b'nei yonah are young pigeons. Okay, so the age has to be young if it's the pigeons and older if it's the turtle doves. So now we're going to talk about what these are for. So basically, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he's going to say, the kinim, if you bring an offering, you say, I'm going to bring a bird offering. Now, often you would say, I'm going to bring tolim, or I'm going to bring b'nei yonah. So if you're going to bring tolim, you put it in the box called kinim, which means pair of birds. If you're going to give b'nei yonah, you put it in gozlei olah. Okay, so according to him, both are for voluntary offerings. If I said I'm going to bring a bird offering, the kinim are if you promise turtle doves, and the gozlei olah, which are young, right? Gozalim are young, so that must be referring to the young pigeons, to the pigeon offering, the b'nei yonah. A little bit of a difficulty with his commentary is, why don't you call it torim then? Why do you call it kinim? It would have been much better if you would call them torim and b'nei yonah, and then we know exactly what you mean. So it's a bit of a weakness with this commentary. But you'll see later why he was motivated to say what he said. Kulan olot. But all of these, no matter how you say it, they're all, or both these, the kinim and the gozlei olah, are for burnt offerings that somebody volunteers for someone volunteers for to go on the altar. Okay, kinim mean pair of birds. Okay, that's what they mean. It's not kinim like lice. I see someone's writing, right? That's with a kaf. That's something else. Okay, this is kinim with a kuf, and it means pair of birds. There's Masechet kinim. We're going to get to it. It's actually only Mishnah, but it's in the Daf Yomi cycle. Okay, it's another exception to the rule. Whole mathematical Masechet all about different kinds of cases that would happen with birds that get confused and whose birds what, whose pair what. Anyway, it's an interesting Masechet. We'll get to it much, much, much later. Okay, now we have, so according to him, kinim is not what we normally think. Usually when we think kinim, we think of, okay, other than those who think about lice, but when we think of kinim in the temple, we normally think of pairs of birds that a zav or a zava or a yoledet, or there's the mitzorah and all those people who have to bring echad la'olah and echad l'chatat, right? The mitzorah who doesn't have money, we talked about him, he brings one la'olah, one l'chatat. These are pairs of birds that are obligatory offerings. And normally when we use kinim, we normally don't think like Rabbi Yehuda, that these kinim in the temple, this box is going to voluntary. No, kinim are for your echad l'chatat, echad la'olah. And then, so we're going to see now the Tanakama, the Chachamim disagree. Chachamim omrim kinim echad chatat echad olah. No, it's obligatory offerings. And then gozlei olah kulan olot. If you want voluntary, that goes into gozlei olah. And then according to Chachamim, there's no distinction, tolim or b'nei yonah. If you specifically wanted tolim, so you put a little note attached to your money that said, I want tolim, or I want b'nei yonah. But otherwise, it all goes into the same pot. There's no distinction between them here. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you had to bring a pair of birds, what'd you do with your money? So according to him, you have to give it directly to the Kohen and say, I want you to take this money and use it. You couldn't just put it in the box, and we're going to see why. Okay, I'm going to call it a box, even though it's a shofar, but basically it's a tzedakah box. So now we're going to keep reading, and then later we'll get back to what this machloket is between them. Now we move on. Ha'omer hare alai etzim. We talked about you could put your money in the box for etzim. Now, if you say, I'm going to bring, again, these are all, certainly according to Rabbi Yehuda, they're all voluntary, even according to the rabbis. The only one that's not voluntary is kinim. You say, I'm going to bring wood. How much wood do you have to bring? So wood is plural, etzim, and wood is not a good word. But if you don't translate it, etzim is plural, trees are plural. So how much? You have to bring 2 logs. Okay, how big are the logs? We'll get to that in the Gemara. Livona. Now, in general, when they did the Korban Tamid every day, they would put 2 logs on the altar. So 2 logs also makes sense. Livona, frankincense. If you say, I want to bring frankincense as a voluntary offering, lo yivchot mikometz. It has to be a kmitza. Remember, that's when you take the 3 fingers and you dip them in, that amount. Zahav, if you say gold, lo yivchot mi dinar zahav. No less than 1 gold coin. Shisha nidava ma yosim ba. So what about these 6 for voluntary offerings? What would they do with that? Lokchim ba olot. Okay, you would buy olot with them. Korbanot olah. Habasar l'shem va'olot l'kohanim. The meat, what would happen? The meat gets all burnt, and the olot go to the kohanim. The hides go to the kohanim. And here we're going to learn. Ze midrash darash Yehoyada Kohen Gadol. Yehoyada Kohen Gadol was the Kohen Gadol in the time of Yoash, the king, and he did a big bet kabayit. They redid the temple, and it says here a pasuk that he starts to question from the Torah. It says, "Asham hu Asham Asham laHashem." The Asham is Asham Asham laHashem. It's a bit of a weird pasuk. The literal pasuk is that Asham Asham laHashem is not repetitive. That's a verb. It's saying because you did something wrong against God. But, right, Asham is the Korban Asham, and then the rest of it is the verb. But he understood it as a noun. And then it seems to repeat this Asham. And what's the problem with this pasuk? So there's 2 opinions. I'm going to go with one of them. That this pasuk says the Asham goes to God. Now, it's not true. The Asham, the meat goes to the Kohen. It doesn't get burnt like the Ola. Only small parts get burnt. But the meat goes to the Kohen. And there is another pasuk that says, Kachatat ka'asham, both the Chatan and the Asham are the same. Torah achat lahem, they have the same laws. HaKohen asher yichaper bo lo yihiyeh. The Kohen that does the work, that sacrifices it, he gets it. So why does it say there, Asham la'Hashem? And in another place it says it goes to the Kohanim. How could that make sense? So what does he say? Zakal, kol shuba mishum chatat umishum ashma, something that is left over from a chatat or from an asham, yilakach behen olot, which go habasar lashem va'orot lekohanim. He wants to find something that also goes mostly to God, but also goes to the kohanim, and that must be the leftovers from the asham and from the chatat go to olot, and that's where he learned that all these nidavot, that's kind of the basis for the halachot that we saw throughout the Masechet, that if you have leftovers from certain sacrifices, they become an olah. V'omer, and then it also explains a pasuk that appears by Yehoyada. That's kind of where he, as we say in Hebrew, nafal Simon, he figured it out. It says here, kesef Hashem v'kesef chatat lo yuva beit Hashem. It won't be brought to the house of God, even though, of course, it's brought to the house of God. What do you mean? It's a very weird pasuk. Of course, the chatat and Hashem they go to the sacrifices. And it says, la kohanim yihiyu. It will be for the kohanim. Now, it's true, normal chatats and Hashem go to the kohanim, but what he's saying here is it must be, they won't be brought in their normal way. Here we're talking about ones that are left over, and they will go to the kohanim, meaning the kohanim will get the hides from them, as opposed to, let's say, let's just put it in the temple treasury and we'll use it for upkeep of the temple. No, it's actually going to be something that's going to go to the kohanim, meaning we're going to sacrifice them. That's the verse that explains how he had this revelation. Okay, Tanya. Now the Gemara is going to start. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, lo haya shofar shel kinim b'Yerushalayim. We're finally going to find out why he thought against what we've been learning all along, and you see throughout the most of the Gemaras that we've seen and that we will see talk about this kupav kinim as if it goes for the zava, the woman who gives birth, who has to bring these sacrifices that are obligatory. So why does he think it's voluntary? He says mipnei ta'arovot, because we're worried about all the money mixing together in the box. What's the problem of the money mixing together? Shemat, if you have a chatat, if you remember, we keep learning what happens if you have a chatat, that I put money aside or an animal aside and then I die. What happens with that money, right? It has to be destroyed. Can't do anything with that money. So what if I put the money in the box? Shema tamut achat v'nimtzeit mechataot meitot muravot behem. What if I put money in the box? Before the Kohen sacrifices it, takes it out and buys the birds with it, I die. Now what? Now we have money that has to be destroyed. And it's mixed up with all this other money. It could ruin all the money in there and everybody's sacrifices, basically. So Rabbi Yehuda says, we can't do this. This is a big problem. Therefore, everybody gives their money directly to the Kohen, and we don't mix all these monies up together because it could create a huge halachic problem. Now the Gemara says, really, we're worried about this? V'hatanya, there's a brighter where clearly we're not concerned with this. If a woman says, I'm going to bring a pair of birds to the Mikdash. Now, it sounds like a voluntary, but it's not. Here we must mean for my obligation. Okay, she says, I'm going to the temple to bring my pair of birds that I have to bring for, let's say I gave birth. So what does she do? She brings it. Here we see it explicitly. She brings it. She puts it in the shofar. Then what happens? Until her sacrifice is brought, she can't eat sacrificial meat. That's what comes up in the verses about the woman who gives birth. After she brings her sacrifice, then she can eat. Remember, we talked about this. They're called mechusar kapara until they bring their sacrifice. Once they bring their sacrifice, they can eat sacrificial meat. She can eat kodashim immediately because she assumes the Kohen deals with it right away. She doesn't have to worry. I mean, obviously, she shouldn't eat the next minute, but she can wait an hour or so and assume that the Kohen dealt with it already. And right, so we're going to have a spotlight on her, spotlight on the Kohen. What happens is very obvious. She puts money in, he takes the money out. They never necessarily see each other, right? They don't know what's going on the other side. So she doesn't know what's going on inside. She can assume he took care of her sacrifice. This doesn't have to do with our issue, by the way. This is something else. What about him? He doesn't have to worry. He doesn't know what's going on outside. He doesn't have to worry that whoever put the money in there maybe died, right? He doesn't have to worry about that. Okay. Now, it doesn't say anyone disagrees. So therefore, it must be, Rabbi Yehuda must agree with this, that a Kohen can sacrifice the money and not worry that maybe there's someone's dead money mixed in there. So how do we explain this? So what do they answer? It's a little bit complicated. I'm going to try to explain it simply in the way that you understand. Okay, you'll see why it's complicated in a second. Rabbi Yehuda was saying what he said, that we're not a regular Kohen. When it's said in that source that the Kohen doesn't have to worry, a Kohen doesn't really have to worry about it. If someone put it in the box, he can actually take the money and use it. However, comes Rabbi Yehuda and says, but if we know for sure that someone died, right? I kind of explained it. She doesn't know what's going on in there, and he doesn't know what's going on in there. But what if he does? What if someone tells him, by the way, someone just put money in and they just dropped dead right outside? So they tell him, now what? So comes Rabbi Yehuda and he says, if you know for sure that someone died, all that money is disqualified. Now you have to take the next step. Therefore, so now, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think you always have to worry. In other words, if you're a Kohen and people put money in the box, you don't have to start wondering, maybe, right? This is the what if syndrome. What if they died? What if? You don't have to do that. That he agrees, and that's what it says in the Bright. However, what he does, and the reason this is a little complicated is because he still doesn't think you put it in the shofar, and that Bright clearly said you put it in the shofar, but we have to leave that aside because there's no good answer to that. But what he says is, since if the Kohen actually finds out all that money is going to be disqualified, that you did die, all that money is going to be disqualified. Therefore, because of that, we're going to, basically Rabbi Yehuda said, let's try to avoid that situation. Okay, on the off chance that someone will die right away and the Kohen will find out, therefore, let's just not make a box for that purpose. Okay, so that's how we get to it. It's confusing because he is worried that maybe it'll happen, but the Kohen himself doesn't have to worry if for some reason the money got mixed. He doesn't have to worry, maybe someone died. But since if someone did, he would know. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda said, let's just try to avoid any situation of that happening, and let's not have people put it in that box. And that's why he thought the box wasn't for obligatory offerings, but for voluntary. Okay, next. Now they say, V'i amrina, and what if you do say like Rabbi Yehuda? If someone dies, we have a better solution. Forget about having to throw away all that money. Remember Breira, where you can designate something and say, well, now this means this. You basically have a pile of money. It's arbitrary whose money is whose. we can just say Nivror arba'a zuzeh, which is 4 zuzim is the amount for 2 animals. Actually, we know this from Chag Gadya. Trey zuzeh, right? You bought a gedi for 2 zuz. That's good. I just thought of it now, right? So 2 birds, it's different though. That's a gedi. It's actually, it doesn't really match up. But 2 birds should be cheaper, theoretically. But anyway, in the time of, when this was written, so 4 zuz for 2 birds, Vinishte benara, throw those 4 into the nahal, v'idach lishtaru, and then you can say, those are symbolic of that person's, and everything else is fine. But Hamrina Ba'alma, Rabbi Yehuda Le'le Breira. Oh, well, we know that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold by Breira, and that's obviously why Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think this is a solution. He doesn't think you could do that. You actually have to find the actual money, and there's no way to do that, and therefore you're going to be stuck. And that's why he says, don't make the box for that. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Bunama, Rabbi Ba Bar Mama Bai. Okay, he said that Rabbi Ba Bar Mama asked the following question. Amal Harei Alai Eitz. We're now getting back to the trees, the wood. If you say I'm going to bring wood singular as opposed to plural, now we have a bit of a problem. When you say eitzim, it's obvious you meant plural, 2, and 2 is the amount anyway to use. What if you said eitz? Since 1/8 isn't enough for using on the altar, maybe you have to bring 2. So maybe gizar chad, you really only have to bring 1. Amar Rabbi Lazal, this is always nice. At the end of our Masechet, we get kind of a lead into something we're going to learn in the next Masechet, which is Yoma. Manita Amrakin, the Mishnah says so. Each wood log that you put on the altar is viewed as a separate offering. Okay, there's a whole question about, is the wood even considered an offering, like a sacrifice? Some people say yes, some people say no. Here, this sugya clearly seems to call it a sacrifice, a korban b'fnei atzmo. Kehai de tinin taman, as it says in the Mishnah in Yoma, shnayim biyadam shnei gizrei etzim l'rabot et haitzim. I forget which one. I think it's the morning. It's different in the morning and the afternoon. In the afternoon, only one kohen brings both. But in the morning, unless I have it wrong and it's switched, but in the morning, these are for the daily sacrifice. In the morning, each kohen would bring 2 kohanim, each one would bring 1 log. So therefore you have it that each log must be its own independent unit. And that's why if I say log, I meant 1 and not 2. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Amar. What's the size of them? Ovyan ama ba'ama socheket. Yesterday, or a few days ago, we had the whole thing about amot, if they're 5 tefachim or 6 tefachim. But even if you say, let's say they're 6 tefachim or 5 tefachim, whatever they are, how many tefachim, are the tefachim tight fists, right, a handbreadth, or loose? If you remember, we had this discussion once before. Are they sochakot, which is like a happy face, which is looser, or in the Bavli, they were called atzuvot, sad face. Here they're called geduma, which is tight, okay, more like smaller. So how many, right, are they smaller tefachim in a cubit, or looser, wider tefachim, more expanded? So the thickness of this log is ama socheket, is the bigger one, but orkan ba'ama geduma. But the length is an ama that's tighter, meaning the length of them should be smaller. We're going to see why in a minute. Rabbi Chani b'shem Rabbi Ami kimin tortene. Different explanation to this. I'll go with one of them. That means it's exactly according to its measurements, not socheket and not keduma. It's a perfect ama, exactly. Amar Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak lefi shelo haya mekom ha'aracha ela ama alama. The space of the ma'aracha, and in the Schottenstein, there's a good picture of what the size of the altar was in the time of Moshe. And it has the whole picture. It's 5 by 5, and then in the center you have this 1 ama, which is where the ma'aracha was. It was different in the time of Shlomo. It was a much bigger, or in Bayit Sheni for sure, was a much bigger altar. Anyway, it was an ama, the ma'aracha, and therefore lefichach lo hayabo ela ama gduma. You didn't want the logs to jut out, so therefore you made it a little smaller, the length of it. The thickness didn't matter because that was height. B'tanikin, and we have a brighter that proves that it was an ama. Ama yesod, ama sovev, ama karkov, ama chanot, ama ma'aracha. Each of these things were an ama. The yesod is that base of the altar at the bottom. The sovev is the part at 6 tefachim at 6 amot of height. We went around the altar. The karkov, actually last time we explained the karkov is the sovev, and in some places it is. Here clearly it's not. Some people say the karkov is the area that when you walked around the ma'aracha, the Kohen needed an amma of space to walk everywhere on the altar. Whenever we were going to discuss measurements of how big the altar was and all that, they always have an amma of space for walking. So around the place where they did the fire, there was an amma, that was the karkov. Amma chanot, the corners of the altar, and the ma'aracha, which is where you burnt all the offerings. So there you see, it was an ama, and that's why they made it an ama gedusha, the log, so that they didn't jut out. Livona, lo yifchot mikometz. Here we get, it's very nice. We're on Yom HaShoah, which is a day all about memorial. And here we have a pasuk about memorial. Okay, so lo yifchot mikometz. You can't do less than this kmitza, which is, your 3 fingers. What would fit in your 3 fingers, your 3 middle fingers? How do we get that? Ne'emar kan azkara, v'ne'emar lahalan azkara. Okay, it's for a memorial. Now, what's for a memorial? The lechem apanim, the showbread, went along with 2 bowls of frankincense. They were for a memorial. Okay, this is interesting. If you think about Yom HaShoah, people light candles, right? You want to do some sort of action to remember something. So they had an action to remember something. Also by the minchat choteh, which is the mincha offering, that someone who sins, but it's an accidental sinner who does something and doesn't have the money to afford animals, doesn't have the money to afford birds. He brings a mincha, a meal offering, because that's the cheapest. And there it also says azkara. So there, ma azkara ha'amor lahala melo kometz, af azkara ha'amor ka melo kometz. There, in a mincha offering, it's always a kometz is the measurement. It doesn't say how much frankincense you're supposed to bring. So they learn it from Gzera Shava. That's a memorial. This is a memorial. Therefore, we're going to say it's all kometz. So therefore, if you volunteer now we have 3 things. I want to make it clear. We're learning from the minchat choteh to the lechem apanim, to the levona and the lechem, the frankincense and the lechem apanim. From there, we're going to learn that the measurement is a kometz of levona. So therefore, if I voluntarily want to bring a voluntary offering of levona on the altar, it's a kometz also. Okay, so there's 3 things we're learning, one from the other. But then they say, wait, if you're learning a voluntary offering from the lechem apanim, well, what happened to the frankincense there? There were 2 bowls of frankincense. So there were 2 kmatzim. So maybe when I volunteer a levona, maybe I have to do it the same size as they did it then, which was 2. This is going to be similar to the trees, which is, are the logs viewed as 2 separate offerings or one offering of 2 logs? Likewise, these 2 bowls of frankincense, are they considered one offering of 2, or are they 2 separate offerings of 1? And then if I say levona, then I really mean only one of them, the size of 1, which is what the obvious conclusion is. But they're going to suggest that maybe levona, we're learning it from lechem apanim. There were 2, maybe you need 2 if you do a voluntary offering. So the whole way we got to the measurement was from the mincha of a sinner. Now that, if you have any less than 1 handful, or fingers full, then it's disqualified. So afkan chometz hachaser pasul. Therefore, also by the frankincense in the showbread, if you're missing any bit, it's going to be disqualified, even if the other one makes up for it, because they're not viewed as one whole. They're each viewed as 2 independent, and that's how they prove it. And therefore, they're going to be viewed as 2 independent ones. And therefore, if you volunteer a levona, you have to bring it the size of 1 kometz and not 2. Amar Rabbi Yossi milta de Rabbi Ila amra hamitnadev levona mevi'ah bekumtzo shel kohen gadol. This is not the kohen gadol. He brings it as, what is a kmitza? Kmitza depends on how big your hand is. If my hand's small, I'm going to have a small kmitza. The kohen has a big hand, it's going to have to be bigger. So if I volunteer a frankincense offering, I have to do it the size of the biggest fingers of a kohen. Okay, what a kmitza would be for someone who has the biggest hands. But Rabbi Chizkiah b'shem Rabbi Yirmiyah says, afilu b'kometz haba'ali. No, even I could do it by my own, not by, I don't have to assume what the biggest size will be. I could just do it my own size. The zahav, lo yifchot. Zahav is to be at least a dinar zahav. We're going to limit this now. Amar Rabbi Elazar, bushis kirtzua. That's if you say golden coin or something like that, then it's a dinar zahav. Avalo is kirtzua. If you just say gold randomly, maybe afilu tzinoha, even a little hook of gold, because anything of gold has worth. So when you say gold, you can mean something very small. If you say gold something, then it has to be a dinar zahav. Shisha l'nidavar. Going to end now with these 6 l'nidavar. Why do they have 6 things? Like I said, 4 opinions. Chizkiah amar keneged shisha batei avot. This is going to be our lead in also to Yoma. Yoma, we're going to see all these inward fighting among the Kohanim. I want this. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want more. Well, guess what? The nidavot, right? There were 6 families that worked within a week, and each one had a different day. So each one took from a different box, and that way, this is your box, this is your box, this is your box. No one can complain. Hey, because remember, they get to eat from some of the parts of the offerings. So then they get the hide of the nidavot. Right here, they only get the hides, but they're going to get the hides and they want, I want more, I want less. So make 6, everybody gets a box, and that resolves the jealousy issue. Pal, bulls, egel, calves, seir, goats, ayil, rams, gedi, kids, tale, lambs. So there's 6 different animals that, again, the motar of them, the extra goes to these nidavot. Shmuel amar keneged shisha korbanot. Remember, there were 6 different types of sacrifices where the extras of them would go to the nidavah. So what are they? Kinei zavim v'kinei zavot, that's 1, even though it sounds like 2 because it's the same category, just male or female. Kinei yodot, the pairs of birds of the women who give birth. Chataot, sin offerings. Ashamot, guilt offerings. Menachot, meal offerings. And asirit haifa, which is the 10th of the ephah that the Kohen Gadol brings his own special mincha offering. All the extras of those, each one goes into a different box. Last answer, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and here we end in a really nice note. Al yedei shanidava meruba ribu la shofarot harbe. The reason why they have so many places to put money is because people always wanted to give burnt offerings to the temple. There was this rush of people wanting to give, and therefore they did 6 boxes because it wasn't enough if you have 1 or 2 or 3 to hold all the money that people brought to the temple. So there you end on a very nice note. We're going to see in Daf Kaf on Shabbat, there's also this reference to people wanting to give offerings. So keep this Gemara in mind when we're going to see it also on Daf Kaf, this idea that people really liked bringing offerings to the temple, and it kind of gives you an insight into the people, which is always the aspect that's interesting about the temple work. It's hard to understand all the ins and outs and all the details, but there's this idea of there was a lot of interest in bringing money, and that's why they had 6. Okay, we'll end here for today. And that's not just money, specifically for sacrifices, right? There was this love of sacrifices and voluntary offerings. Have a good day, everyone, and Yom HaShoah, mashma'uti, as they say.